Hey everybody, Tony D and little Joan here with the video you're all waiting for. The latest on the election. Man, now it's just coming in. I absolutely am missing tons of stuff. I know, Joan. It's just too much to process. So what happened today? Well, we've got Rudy in Michigan. We've got Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood at the rally in Georgia. We've got Trump giving his own speech on the election fraud, and information's just pouring out. So I'm going to come up with a few highlights here. The big highlight, which happened, actually this was revealed a couple of days ago. This is the connection to China. Parent company of Dominion Voting Systems received $400 million from Swiss investment bank, 75% owned by the Chinese government. Wouldn't that make it a Chinese bank then? I mean, I guess it used to be Swiss, but the Chinese own the majority stake, so it's a Chinese bank, isn't it? The point is, this is bad. That China has anything to do with our voting systems. Even like a couple of companies removed. I mean, they gave them a $400 million, is that a loan? Parent company, $400 million from Swiss. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a loan. I mean, maybe it's a bribe. Yeah, no kidding. The Chinese want their fingers in the voting system. I know. It's an outrage, Joan. Joan hates communism. So, she gets very upset. Okay? Here you go. Now you can... It's all right. Commies aren't going to get you, Joan. I won't let the commies get you. The communists will use any tactic whatsoever to get at us. That doesn't mean they attack us 24/7. They're going to be smart about it. But this is obvious. Of course they're going to have their hand in the voting system somehow. And if they have this much influence over the company, $400 million buys you a lot of influence. Come on. Tell me it doesn't. Tell me how much money it would take you to kill somebody or betray your friends. $5 million? $10 million? What would you do for that kind of money? Now, you might have some principles. Now think about the people you've met. Now think about the most unscrupulous person you've ever met. Now understand that most politicians are even more unscrupulous than that. So, yeah, this buys you a lot of influence. Here's another one of many revelations today, the last couple of days. Trump team says 40,000 people voted twice in Nevada, which is more than enough to flip it. Rudy's got another episode of Common Sense today. He talks about the constitutional argument, which Tim Pool talked a lot about in his videos over the past few days. This is probably where they're headed in terms of going in the SCOTUS. They're not going to prove fraud. They're probably going to prove or attempt to argue that what happened in Pennsylvania, what happened with the mail-in vote was unconstitutional and led to all these problems. And if these votes are unconstitutional, then, the Supreme Court has to rule if they can get in front of SCOTUS. And at that point, I think the only fair solution from the position of SCOTUS, they could do what they did during the Bush era. They just gave it to Bush. They said, stop counting. Bush won. In the Trump era, who knows? I think the fair thing to do, and, Democrats would hate it, but it would be constitutional. I think it would be fairer than what they did with Bush, is throw it to the delegates. Throw it to Congress and make them do the delegate vote. It would be, it would be legal. It would be fair. You could, cry and moan that it wasn't right, but at least it would be fair and legal. So, yeah, this is a one you should watch if you want to get. And there's so much legalese. I can't process it all. You'd have to watch it to get it. And Rudy's got a lot of good videos on that front. And here's Trump. Trump has his own channel on YouTube, just called Donald J. Trump. So get yourself subscribed to that. But it's about a 45-minute speech. He goes over some of the highlights, some of the bigger voter fraud things. He doesn't even get into some of the stuff that came out over the last 2 days, but gets into quite a bit. For instance, this just came out, I think, a day or two ago. These guys, or one of these guys, I think, was a subcontractor from Wisconsin, and he was informed of plans to backdate 100,000 mail-in ballots. There was a trucker who claimed to have driven nearly 300,000 complete mail-in ballots across state lines from Bethpage, New York to Harrisburg, PA, and then drove them to Lancaster and dropped the trailer in Lancaster, and he went home. So who knows if they're telling the truth, but I mean, it's just yet another story. We'll get into this a little later. This was I think Trump mentioned this story, significantly large. No, I don't think he did. A large Detroit poll worker used her body to hide ballot book from legal observers. So there was all sorts of shenanigans going on in Detroit and Philadelphia. They were kicking out everybody when you objected. They got mad. I mean, it's just all over the place. And yeah, this this I just thought was funny. Trump says he'll allow the release of the classified JFK assassination files. I don't know why he announced this now. I mean, you know, when I first saw this, I said, "Oh, this is going to be more evidence that he thinks he's going to lose." But this might be just another thing to sort of distract from the deep state actors in this mess. So they have to scramble, like, "Oh shoot, we should go back through those files and make sure there's nothing too bad in them or whatever." Yeah, I mean, it's just a deluge of information today. And then the rally. This is Lynn Wood, Sidney Powell, and Vernon Jones. I haven't even finished watching it all yet. Lynn Wood was just fired up. I mean, the guy was just fired up. He's saying it's 1776 again, and they're talking that the government officials down there took money from China, and they have the proof. Oh, and Sidney Powell was in an interview yesterday, and she says they have photos of pay stubs of people who were paid to ballot harvest in the Georgia area, I believe it was Georgia. So those people are going to jail. I mean, it just keeps on coming. It just keeps on pouring in. There's just tons and tons of fraud. Now, some of the excuse to dismiss these suits has been to say, well, that's not enough to change the election. When A.G. Barr weighed in, he said, we don't see enough ballot malfeasance that it's going to change the election. I like that word, malfeasance. I keep using it. And that, I think, was part of the plan to have such little, each little scheme to change the vote was kind of small. And some of it, I think, was just to distract from the bigger change. I think the biggest change probably came from the algorithm from Dominion itself, but also these truckloads of ballots were certainly big changes. So perhaps it was like they injected the votes in the algorithm and then had come up with a paper trail in order to make them all match up. I think, Trump won by so much, they were scrambling. They were scrambling just to get it in. And they had so much control over the voting stations in these areas, and they were just rampantly. I mean, like in Georgia, they're destroying the machines, they're resetting them, they're erasing evidence. These judges aren't really stopping it. They're not really stopping it. So I hope this helps, and I hope Republicans in Congress finally stand up, or at least enough of them. We already have one congressman, I believe he's from Alabama. He's already announced that he will object to the vote, or he's claiming he will. Now, Republicans have a very bad history of going back on stuff like this, but he's saying he'll object to the vote. You need at least another senator, and then that forces Congress to debate the election and debate the validity of the votes and the electoral votes or whatever. I hope it doesn't come to that, because then we're going to be relying on Congress to, stop the steal. I wouldn't want to rely on them. I wouldn't want to rely on these guys. And Trump said in his speech, I've talked to so many different, Republicans. Actually, I think it was Rudy and his thing. I've talked to so many different down ballot Republicans, smaller, guys who are Republicans, who are like, well, I think this is a stolen election, but I don't want to say anything. They'll ruin me. What do you think's going to happen? If this, look, I've avoided saying this because I didn't want to seem too dark, but if they steal this election, they'll steal them all. What you'll see is a Republican Party that is, it's like the token Democrat on Fox News. Yeah, they'll be Republicans, but they'll always be in the minority, and they'll just be the guys, they'll be designed to be the controlled opposition. That's it. You'll have a one-party rule, and you'll have the illusion of a second party. And maybe once in a while they'll allow a rhino to take the presidency, but it's not going to be real. It's going to be a bunch of globalists deciding on, who's going to be in power this week. And, the Democrats will push through everything. They'll push through everything. They're going for broke at this point. And quite frankly, after seeing today's deluge of fraud and Lynn Wood talking about how they seem to have proof that these people actually took bribes directly from China or took Chinese money somehow. This is a matter of survival for some of these people. They need to win this fraudulent election just so they're not going to prison. Now, I don't think Biden's in any danger. I don't think it'll go up to him. I think most of these guys will happily go to prison and rather than spill their guts. But, setting aside the whole CIA rumor, and I'm going to set that aside for another video, this, has to come through. Trump says in the next 2 weeks we're going to have a big revelation here. Jeez, we don't have much time. I know the deadline is, there's a first deadline's on the 8th, and then the next deadline is like the 14th. So I guess we're looking at mid-December, and finally this is going to come out. And you've got people calling for martial law. Linwood called for limited martial law. General Flynn supposedly called for martial law just to investigate all this. It's going to take a few years to investigate all this. I don't think martial law is the answer. I think that's a very dangerous play. If something happened to Trump or he passed on, we'd probably never get out from martial law. So, I don't think there'd be any way. Plus, if he declared martial law, it could be likely to it could start turning into a shooting war at that point. I mean, the people on the left could completely panic and just start, I think it'll just make things worse. I think whatever Trump's got in mind, seems to be well, I don't know if it's working, but it seems to be. I mean, the evidence is there. Look, whatever you think about this, and I know some of you are like, yeah, you're a lunatic. I, I promise you, if Biden gets in, probably within a few years, this is all going to be common knowledge. Oh, yeah, he stole the election. And I know some of you don't care. I think it's going to be very common knowledge in a year or two that, oh, yeah, Biden stole the election. I mean, not Biden himself, but, the Democratic Party cheated to get Biden to win. And that's very dangerous. It's very dangerous. Trump is not the same kind of danger, even in your most paranoid fantasies. He's been in office for 4 years. If he was a fascist, he could have activated the Insurrection Act multiple times. He had more than an opportunity to do it, and he would be dictator for life. He'd be dictator for life right then. He could have avoided all of this by activating the Insurrection Act, preemptively. If he had done it back during the George Floyd riots and kept it going all this time, he certainly could have, done something about the elections. He could have essentially said, no, the only acceptable way would be to vote in person. That would be it. He'd essentially be the dictator. You wouldn't have been able to stop him. But he didn't do that because he believes in the system, and he understands the optics of that. The optics of that are very, very bad. So he has to win this. He has to. They have to make this happen. The courts have to reconsider. Now, what can you do? Well, you could go to rallies like this if you're in the area, but more importantly, if you're in the swing states, or even if you're not, write your local state representatives and urge them to support Trump. Urge them to look at the evidence. Send them a link or two. Nothing too crazy. Something like this. I mean, this isn't too bad. This is, what is this? NTD. I don't know what that is, but, this rally, send them the links to the Michigan hearings, the Pennsylvania hearings, the Arizona hearings. I mean, you've got people reporting, and they've signed affidavits. You can go to prison if you fill out a fake affidavit. And these people, they witness it. They witness people scanning, a thing for Biden multiple times. They got to vote for Biden and just keep running it in the machine. You've got people seeing the trucks pull up with the hundreds of thousands of ballots, and they're all for Biden, and they look suspicious. They look like they're Xerox. They look like they were printed by a computer. They're signed by the same person over and over again. And these are all separate instances, but they all add up. And, one of the most glaring things from Pennsylvania, which I even forgot to mention, was they determined that, they had scanners for these things, right? Physical scanners that go through the machines. Well, you can only scan so many ballots in a period of time, in an hour or 4 hours. Well, according to their records, they had something like a 400,000 in a 4-block. I think it might have been a 4-hour period. They scanned something like 400,000 votes. Well, they calculated that that's physically impossible with the machines they had, with the number of machines they had, even operating at full capacity during that time period, continually, never making mistake, never getting a jam. You couldn't possibly scan that many votes. You could only scan like something like 150,000, something like that. So how did they scan 400,000 in that time? It's impossible. And you could say, well, they made a mistake. They made a mistake in the entry. Okay, if they did that, well, then that's another reason to investigate. I mean, there's been a lot of that. We already know in Pennsylvania that they mailed out 1.8 million ballots and got back 1.4 million, but counted 2.5. And again, you could say, well, that's a mistake in the computer. Okay, well, that's more proof that the election is effed up. If they can't even count the big numbers like that, I mean, if they're that off, if they're off by the margin, more than the margin by far, then something's very, very wrong. And again, as Rudy says, the Democrats had plenty of reason to cheat. They had more than the motive and opportunity. Why wouldn't they cheat? They kicked out Republican observers. He said in Pennsylvania, not a single mail-in vote was observed by a Republican because they either had kicked them out or kept them so far away no one could examine the votes. So those votes aren't even examined, which is by law, that's what they have to be in Pennsylvania. And look, I would have been perfectly happy with some sort of recount. They could have just forced a recount where you look at the votes again. But they're fighting that. They refuse to have a hand recount where you could look over each individual vote. Why are they doing that? If they won, what's the big deal? You can get it done in a few days. No, they cheated. And there's just an avalanche of proof and evidence. But unfortunately, there's probably not enough time to gather it all. It's going to take probably years to sort through all this stuff. People will be going to jail all through the second Trump administration. And if they don't, then if Biden does steal this election, they're probably going to steal Georgia, and that'll be it. You'll never see a real Republican in control ever again. And for some of you, you might laugh and say, hooray! But you don't understand what that means. One-party rule will guarantee massive corruption. And what you'll essentially do is force all the real Republicans to become Democrats. Oh, you laugh again, but that's not going to be their plan. Their plan isn't to adopt your policies. Their plan will be to subvert them from within. See, they'll call themselves Democrats, but they'll actually be Republicans. And slowly, they'll have to work their way into the party until they either break it apart or take it over. But by that time, God knows where we'll be then. So let's hope Trump could pull this off. I'm confident that Trump has a solid plan and could do this. I go back and forth in my confidence. Yesterday it was pretty low. Today I'm feeling pretty good about it. I'm seeing a lot of stuff here. But it's important that you write your state representatives and urge them to support Trump. Urge them to say no to the vote. The electoral, this whole thing has been rigged. Tell them. Send them one of the links. I mean, what's it going to cost you? It's going to cost you 5 minutes of your time to look up the website. Just do a Google search of your local state representatives and write them. They look at that stuff. If they get a few dozen, a few hundred, definitely. A few dozen, they might look at it. Or at the very least, their assistant might go, people are starting to talk about this election. You better think twice before you vote against Trump. Especially if they're a Republican. Oh my gosh, your breath, doggy. Your breath. I got to get her a mint. All right, check us on the next video.